It's Dave here and Darren over there. And we're here to talk what happened in this fantastic week of post-Vikings regular season football. And there is a lot, so stick with us. Hey everybody, welcome to Saturday. I haven't had enough to drink yet. That's the problem. Saturday afternoon football talk between two old bloggers. You got me, Dave, one old blogger, and over here you have Darren, the other old blogger. How you doing, Darren?
I'm doing great, Dave. How are you doing?
I could be better. Didn't sleep well last night. A little grumpy, so that should be interesting when this show really gets rolling. We're going to talk about, as I previewed, what's happened this week. There's a lot of change. There needs to be a lot of change. It's the theme of today's show. Vikings decisions, a time to change. So let's get into it.
Indeed.
All right. Here we go. We got a picture of TCO Center, the office building and headquarters of your Minnesota Vikings. And a lot of things happened after the game against the Bears, where the Vikings pulled out the win, but the next morning they fired both Rick Spielman and Mike Zimmer. These two gentlemen were the premier decision makers, Mark and Ziggy Wilf, and they'd called Rick Spielman into the office first. It was supposedly at 7:30, and then told him he was no longer going to be there. He was reportedly shocked at that. And then Mike Zimmer at 8:15 told Mike he was being released. Mike supposedly said thank you, nodded his head, and turned around and walked out the building. reportedly.
Flip, flipped them the bird after he closed the door.
I don't know about that. But first decision where you wanted to talk about was Mike Zimmer. Go for it.
What I'd wanted to talk about with the Zimmer getting fired was the way he went out, and not what is reported is, and I think it's been corroborated a few times now, is that Spielman, after he got the news, like you said, he was very surprised. He had been working on, if you believe some of the reports, he'd been working on potential head coaching candidates, and thought he'd be part of that process. Uh, wasn't part of the process, but when he got the bad news for him and the good news for a lot of Viking fans. No offense, Rick. He addressed the team, and it apparently, according to Doogie Wolfson, it was an emotional address by him. Zimmer did not, from what we have heard, did not address the team, and in his
Not
statement,
on Monday.
not on Monday.
No, there was word that he did after the game in the locker room. But,
Yeah, but
there's nothing to corroborate that other than people said, yeah, he talked to him after the game because there was no cameras there or nothing's been released. So we don't know. But you're about to talk about Mike Zimmer's statement.
yes, in that statement, and if you you got it up there. If you get a chance to read it all, but no mention, no thanking of Spielman or the Wilfs, who were the ones that gave him his shot to become a head coach after he'd been turned down many times, or not many times, I don't know if many times, but he had been turned down in the past, hadn't got a coaching job. No mention of them, and no, he mentions the players, at least this is how I interpret it. He mentions the players that on the Vikings that welcomed him in 2014 when he started the job, but he didn't thank the players who played for him this year.
No, all he said is, I'll miss coaching the players. And I want to thank the ones that welcomed me in 2014.
Yeah, and I'm not the only one who's noticed those the things that aren't in his statement, and it just, to me, that was a surprising thing for me to see from Zimmer. He'd what the before he got the job in 2014, what had been said as to why Zimmer had not gotten the job, a head coaching job before that, after many successful seasons as a defensive coordinator, was that he, in interviews, he was too blunt. He rubbed people the wrong way, and maybe he lacked some of those people management skills that are so important when you're in a head coaching position. Now, he eventually did get the job in 2014, and we talked about this before, Dave. When in 2014, when he got the job, he was an obvious candidate to me to take over the Vikings as a head coach, and I wanted the Vikings to get him as a head coach. I thought they needed a guy who was a tough guy, no nonsense, defensive mind. After the Leslie Fraser years, where it seemed to be more of a laissez-faire, and the defense was in a big mess. We got him. I was very happy. I think a lot of Vikings were. Things turned out very well. I think from 2014 to 2017, the team got better. It played tough football. It played smart Excuse me. It played smart football. But after 2018, things just seemed to didn't improve.
Go south. Hey,
But
Dan, Aaron, we are going to talk about that momentarily.
And
Now,
I just
you wanted
I
to
just
bring
kind of
up
feel
a
that,
player that did vocalize his support for Mike Zimmer on the way out.
yeah, it was one that I noticed was Dalvin Cook. It was the week leading up to the Bears game, the final, and he was I thought, very vocal in his support of the coaching staff. Said, "These are the guys I ride with. They've done a lot for me. We're all in this together. I support them." And Cook is one of the best players the Vikings have. He's a team leader, and that says something. So he was a guy who was in support of Zimmer. even though, but a couple other guys, whose comments got a lot of play last week were Brian O'Neill and Eric Kendricks, and they said a lot of things that if you read between the lines, and you don't even have to read between the lines in some
When they
of the
go,
cases.
what was it? The exact quote.
Well, the big one that got the biggest play was Kendricks talking about a culture of fear does
Fear.
not work. Yeah. I might not get the exact words right on that one, but
that
that's a pretty.
that was the one I was referring to. And yes, if you're living in, living in a workspace where you think you're walking on eggshells all the time and you don't want to piss off the wrong people, that is not a very healthy workplace to be in whatsoever. It's especially not for your own mental health. It's very it's frustrating for us watching on the outside. It's got to be miserable for the players and staff that were on the inside.
And the thing that really stands out with Kendricks talking about the culture of fear doesn't work. He also talked in his comments about, he felt it was important that all players felt that they had a voice, that they could voice how they the direction of the team, where it was going, and that would be valued. He didn't feel that it was under the current coaching staff. Brian O'Neill had a lot of comments I thought which were more geared to the impact of a team culture on younger players. It wasn't so long ago. He was a fresh rookie 4 seasons ago, but one of the criticisms about Zimmer, of course, has been that he I don't know if he didn't like rookies, but they had a very short leash if he played them. He was reluctant to play them when he did, it seemed, and if you look at how Cam Dancer was handled, or some other players, kind of a yo-yo thing.
He played him only if he had to. Was a lot of the perception.
There were some exceptions, and Eric Kendricks is one of those who started from the day he got here. But for O'Neill, talking about, really important for it's important if we spend so much time together, the season is so long, it'd be nice if you had guys who said hi to you in the hallway when they saw you, who asked how you were doing.
That's what blows my mind. As a leader, you want to take care of your people, you want to make sure everything's going well, and that includes learning who they are, and generally good ones will learn who the families are, the significant others. Hey, Zimmer's a dog guy. Maybe he learns that, you have a dog and his name is Teddy or whatever, things like that. That makes people more personable and makes them want to work for you even harder. And it's one of Zimmer's faults, without a doubt. And it cost him his job. One of the reasons.
Yes. It was one of the reasons, and other than not winning enough. But
I'll give you another one here momentarily.
Yeah, but Kendricks and O'Neill their comments really stood out to me. They didn't mention Zimmer specifically, but again, they're two guys, team leaders, never cause any problems off the field or on the field. Leaders in their community, it seems. For them to say those sorts of things about the culture of the team, I think says a lot about what the culture of the team was. Now, when a season doesn't go well, or 2 seasons didn't go well, like we've had with the Vikings in 2020 and in 2021, there's always going to be a lot of fingers pointed at all kinds of people, particularly the head coach. Yeah,
his fault. His fault.
Yeah, his fault. And the stories come out about they did this and that and the other thing. It happened when Leslie Frazier was here. It happened when Dennis Green was here. It happened when Brad Childress was here. Yeah. But for those team leaders, those respected guys to come out and say pretty strong statements without naming the head coach, and then you see that the statement that Zimmer came out, and kind of the way he handled the last week or so, some of those press conferences where he was, he basically was insulting and saying Kellen Mond was insinuating that Kellen Mond was a brutal player, and he had no business being on the bench. That leads me to believe that the stuff about the culture of fear, that Zimmer had lost the locker room. that makes me believe that there's a lot to that. It's not maybe not be 100% picture, the 100% of the story, but I think that
It's a
his
piece.
players, it's a big piece, and I think a lot of his players weren't buying what he was selling anymore, and I think it impacted the play on the field.
Mm-hmm. First, I want to address C-Wise. C-Wise, Mond was running uh, the what is it? The other team squad all season.
Scout team,
Scout
isn't that
team.
what they call it?
So he was he was being watched. Um, was he stuck in at valuable reps during the week on with the starters? No. Nope. 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 All right, we got Wayne has fighting with the Rona. Never go with bad beer, Wayne. Never, never. It never works out. Um, there's one thing I wanted to bring up that popped up today. Phil Mackey reported it, but it was not Phil Mackey that started this one. It was Deion Sanders on Barstool Sports.
Otherwise known as Zimmer's proxy.
Hey, they love each other, and
Yeah.
and Deion credits Zim for his Hall of Fame career. So, and down there when you get to the 925 mark, and if you haven't seen this, please go look it up. It's quite interesting. But he talks about Rick and Mike hadn't talked in months. How long is the season, people? It's months. That had to have been, early on that they've got to the entire point where we're not talking to each other, right? It had to have been bad before then. But you get to that point, it's really, really bad. And you can understand, how does that translate to inside the building? If you've got one person pissed off at the other person and the other person pissed off at the other person, and I've heard stuff about Rick being, he's going to make every decision type deal, and his staff's pissed off at him, and you got players pissed off at Mike, and the whole thing, it's just a massive, massive mess inside the building. I'm surprised the dysfunction level wasn't even higher from what we're starting to hear out. Now, that was Deion. Of course, Phil responds. The QB portion of that comment brings into question how Mike felt about the QB play, i.e., we only had one playing. We know who that is. And and that they went with, the everything's fine. Things clearly been dysfunctional for a while. No sense in hiding the truth now. But what I'm reading out of this is the major sticking point was the sticking point that started it all. If you divide up, and we talked about it with Judd, you had the first term, where Zim builds up the team. Everything's great. 2017, we got leaders, the whole works, everything's wonderful. And then after that, it goes downhill. It's very interesting that this is coming to start out. Tommy Kramer, the great Tommy Kramer, even he weighs in, and he says, talking with former players, everybody felt that one quarterback was a mistake, and Zim was right. But we all need to be positive and move forward. So, and we agree here at least I believe we agree here at Two Old Bloggers, we need to be positive and move forward. However,
I think the one thing about before we leave those comments, and that it was a great Twitter exchange that you cobbled together, David. But again, we know Zimmer and Sanders are very tight, and that it wouldn't. Sanders was
literally
serving
Deion credits him for his career. So
yeah, and Sanders is probably the greatest cornerback who ever played. So that's pretty strong statement. Nobody ever said that Zimmer wasn't a good good defensive coach. I don't think
Oh, no.
anybody's been, well, maybe some people have been saying that lately, but if you look at his whole career, the guy is a great defensive ball coach. But
Oh, Steven, that's
I,
bad.
uh,
Especially since
anyway,
you're in Australia. Hopefully you don't get carted off to some camp somewhere.
here we go. Dave's taking another shot at Australia's COVID rules. Get well, Stephen. Hope your family gets well. But the Sanders must have it's almost like Sanders was paid, like Antonio Brown was paid to say that nice stuff about Zimmer on Cameo. It seems like Sanders gets paid to say that, it was all the QB's fault. Sure, Kirk Cousins, the Kirk Cousins fit with the Vikings has not worked out the way we expected. But when your quarterback throws for 4,300 yards, 33 TDs, seven interceptions, and your defense is fucking 31st in the league, what is the real problem?
Yeah,
Who coaches the defense? There's
Zimmer an issue. Does. Like I said, just individual pieces of that pie, they all come together to make one massive dysfunctional mess. And the Wilfs did the right thing. They've cleared out the first two, and we're going to get into that momentarily. Well, Mike, we wish you luck wherever you go. I do hope at one point in time, if you decide to retire, that you open up a vein and let us all know what happened, or eventually write that book, because it would be great reading.
Could you imagine Zimmer working with like a journalist to write that book? I don't think it's going to be Chris Thomason. He'll be.
Oh no, it won't be Chris. But that would be funny, and Chris would probably do an outstanding job.
He would.
And that would be extremely funny. I don't think it'd be Collar either. However, I wouldn't mind Collar writing it because he does well writing. All right, we're on to our second theme of the day. The other half of that story. Mr. Rick Spielman. Mark and Siggy said, Rick, we know we're going to surprise you, but bye-bye. You're part of this problem. And as we just saw the interchange with, if you're the GM and you're not talking to your head coach in months during the prime time of your season, you've got a problem as GM. That's also a leadership problem. Because you two are supposed to be working together, like, attached at the hip. Mm-hmm. So that may be part of the reason why Mark and Ziggy said, there's the door. Yes, we're going to pay you both for the next 2 years, but gone.
I think as an NFL owner, you accept those. You don't like it, but you accept those sunk costs because
and you write them off as
time,
losses,
right?
Type deal.
Yeah.
Metaphorically speaking.
Yes, that's right.
Now let's talk about some of the GM hunts. And for those that have not watched yet, go back to Climbing the Pocket YouTube page and look up the sit rep I posted this morning, talking about the Big Eight. In the GM search, the search committee, which involves the Wilfs, some interior people like Brez, Jamal Stevenson, there's one or two more.
Miller,
yeah.
Andrew Miller, yeah.
And I think there may be a couple or two outsiders involved as well. They're putting together the list. And on the Vikings Daily Sit Rep from this morning, we discussed that list, Tyler Fornes and I, how the list was bigger. They've whittled it down to 8. Two of our favorite candidates are no longer in consideration. One's in Dallas, that's McClay, and Dodds over in Indy is the other one. They didn't make the list for reasons that they declined. Dodds, it was because he wants to wait and do something there. McClay, because Jerry Jones is going to pay him a shit ton more money, which makes sense. I'll stay there if that's the case. And they want to stay there. So that's fine. So there's 8 external candidates left. You wanted to talk about this one, Queasy, Adolfo Menza?
Yes, I wanted to talk about the Vikings general manager search in general. And one thing I am happy that I agree with the ownerships and the organization's stance to come up with these candidates themselves rather than getting a search firm to do it, because I think that shows that they really are taking this, not that getting a search firm to a headhunting or a company to do it, it would mean you were serious. But I think the fact that the Wilfs are heavily involved in this and have gotten the whole organization who will be working with the GM when he's hired, I think is a very good thing. I like that
Good point.
approach, and I also. There's, like I said, there's 8 candidates on there. I think that one of the you've noticed, if you look at the candidates, there's a lot of there's a lot of minority diversity in that. You've got
Mm-hmm.
one female, a lot of African American guys, and a lot of guys from pretty successful organizations. Adolfo Mensa is I'm bringing him up because. He's the one guy, and he's one guy that he never played football, right? He does not have a football background. He played basketball at Princeton, but he is very much, he's been a hot candidate. He was with the 49ers, and then the Browns poached him, and so he's like been their player VP, I think, of player personnel right at the moment. Been with them the last 2 years, and a very bright guy. Uses analytics and player evaluation, and we've talked about this before,
Mm-hmm.
um, uh, David, about analytics and maybe
Right.
incorporating that more in gameplay during the season, but also in player evaluations. And if you look, Ben Lieber put out. This isn't. He looked at all the 8 candidates, and he put a list of notable players that have been drafted while these individuals who are being
Mm-hmm.
interviewed for the general manager position were drafted while they were with the organizations. And if you look at Adolfo Mensa, some of the players, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, Fred Warner. With Cleveland, you got Owusu Koromoa, that
Mm-hmm.
linebacker who created
Right.
all kinds of havoc when the Browns
Against
played the
us.
Vikings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Greg Newsome the second, the rookie cornerback, was probably the best rookie cornerback this year. Baker Mayfield is quarterback. There's other guys I'm not mentioning, but those are some pretty good players.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and if we don't know Adolfo Mensa's impact on selecting those guys, but we do know that while he was with the 49ers and the Browns, those are players that were uh, selected by those organizations. There's a few whiffs in there too, like Akello Witherspoon at cornerback. He's with the Steelers now, and a couple of others. But I like that list of names as
Mm-hmm.
people that have been drafted recently, and that the Vikings.
They
They've
need
got
good
a pretty good
quality
roster right
players.
now,
Mm-hmm.
but they need good quality players. So I like the analytics background of Adosa Mensa. I like some of some of those players that have been drafted while he was with those organizations are some of the best at their positions. George Kittle, probably the best tight end in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
Deebo
Yeah.
Samuel just made the second team All Pro. Fred Warner's considered one of the best linebackers in the NFL, and we've got a linebacker issue coming up this season.
Yes,
So,
and we'll talk about it
uh,
shortly.
and he, Adolfo Mensa is 32 years old, young, bright, highly educated, didn't play football, but he's been immersed in
But
football
he's
for a number of
been in
years now.
sports. He, like you
Yeah.
said, Princeton graduate. He's got his master's, and I think he's got a doctorate as well. I know he's at least got his master's. He went on to Wall Street to make his wealth there. I don't know how much wealth he did make, but he was on Wall Street as a trader, and so he knows numbers, and he comes from the more business side. And like you said, he has a reputation of being a sponge when it comes to information. He is very personable. He gets along with people just great, from what I'm hearing. And I think he'd be a fantastic choice. I think it's more on the cutting edge versus the standard. There's 3 buckets you can pull a GM out of. You can pull one out of the traditional one, which is the scout. Guy works his way up through the scouting system. Um, through the years, college scouting, pro scouting, advanced scouting, and scout, and evaluating players' talents that way. A lot of those guys are former players, and they work their way up. That's the biggest chunk of GMs. You have the side that comes from the business side, which is these guys got degrees. They could be lawyers. They could be cap guys, and they could be analytics-driven people. They're looking at it from a slightly different version. And then the third bucket is from the coaching side, and there's a few of those as well. And but there's none in this year's Big Eight. The only one was McClay, and like I said, he's been taken out of it because of Jerry Jones. So it should be interesting. I want the leading edge for the Vikings. I want us to be, and I said it before, to be the innovators in football. Football is constantly evolving, even though some things seem cyclical. We may see the flying wing T again. Who knows? But it's all cyclical, but it's evolving further and further in how we play football. I want somebody that has the thought process to take that and go with it and generate wins, knowing that, hey, I need this type of personnel to get this type of result. Not that I want to look for the best fullback I can find because we're going to pound the rock like we did in 2009, or whatever the theory is. So that's what I'm hoping for. Hello, Noir. We'll see. Is there any other ones you wanted to talk about?
There was one of the other ones I wanted to talk about was Catherine Raish, and she's with the Eagles vice president of football operations. I've been with them 3 years. Again, another minority candidate. She'd be the first, if she gets the GM job, she'd be the first one since Leonard Toz's daughter was put in that position back in the early 80s with the Eagles. Again, she's someone she's actually was an assistant general manager in the CFL for the Montreal Alouettes and worked in the front office for the Toronto Argonauts in the NFL. Before she came to the Eagles. Again, another highly educated person. She's in her 30s, so going to have lots of energy. Yeah, lots of energy, just like Adolfo Mensa. Hopefully she has no family, so she'll devote all her time to football. and another hot candidate. Again, we can't discount the diversity, the minority, that the Wolves seem to be. If you look at the 8 candidates they are interviewing, there's a lot of diversity, a lot of minority candidates in there. They're obviously targeting that. The only thing about Catherine is that again Ben Lieber's list of players who have been drafted while she's been with the team. If I'm the Wilfs, I'm asking her, okay, take us through the process of the Eagles drafting Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson. That will be my first question.
And that goes for the other Eagles candidate, Brown.
Brandon Brown. I think one of the things about all of these 8 candidates that was also important to mention before I continue kind of my riff on the GM is Lieber's players, notable players drafted. The only one who's got like a really good quarterback is Ryan Poles from the Chiefs. He was there when they drafted Mahomes. Otherwise, it's Baker Mayfield or nothing as far as quarterback goes. And I think the Vikings are probably going to be in the market for a new quarterback in this offseason.
Yeah, well, so, and that's going to be one of the questions during these interviews. What are your plans? What would you like to do with Kirk Cousins? And as I said before, there's a wrong answer and there's a right answer to that, and we don't know what that answer is, whether it be right or wrong, because only the Wilfs know. So that should be interesting. What's fascinating about her is the breadth of experience. She comes from the business side. She is a lawyer by trade. She has done a bunch of the cap negotiations, other stuff like that. She is mostly into analytics, and she's bounced around, hasn't been there relatively long. And it would be interesting because she would be the first female ever hired
Yeah.
as a GM, if that's the case, because you're right, there was one that was appointed, a daughter of an owner, but she would be the first one hired. And I think it would be a good deal. Both of those two people, both Catherine and Queasy, are young, very young. We pointed that out. Queasy's 32, Catherine's 33. That is extremely, extremely young for a GM. But if the Wilfs go that way, they can expect a long running term. And if they pair it up with a young head coach, we could watch this grow into something very, very special.
And yes, the young and I think just to maybe we get into it a little bit before we move on, but these 8 candidates for me, kind of what what am I looking for from a GM for the next GM? And you talked about cutting edge. We want somebody on the cutting edge. I agree with that, David. And what I want for the Vikings for the next GM is there's this guy. He's in a different sport, baseball. General manager for the Tampa Bay Rays, Eric Neander is his name. I want the Vikings to pick their version of Eric Neander. And if you know baseball at all, you'll know the thing that's notable about Neander and the Rays is that Wayne.
I don't know if he's talking about Neander, if he's talking about Catherine.
I think he's talking about Catherine, but Neander. He's another guy who's became a GM at a young age, but the Tampa Bay Rays have become a model organization in Major League Baseball. They've got like the lowest payroll of any team in the major leagues, basically, and they've been probably, I think they've had the best cumulative overall record the past 5 seasons in Major League Baseball, and they've done that when he's been GM, and he is the Rays under Neander have changed the way the game of baseball is played. They've pioneered things like the opener, which is you bring in a relief pitcher to start your games instead of a starting pitcher, and he pitches 1 or 2 innings instead of the old traditional. The starting pitcher gets starts and he pitches as long as he can go. Everybody, lots of teams do that now. They pioneered the 5-player outfield or the 4-player outfield instead of 3. They've pioneered extreme shifts in the infield. So shifting in the infield has been going on for a number of years, but they've gone beyond that. Yeah, you should watch. And they know exactly what players they're looking for to fit the style of play that they have, and they draft a lot of players, infielders who are multi-positional, and they draft a lot of they'll draft pitchers, a lot of college relief pitchers, because they use a lot of relief guys because they don't use a starter for 6 or 7 innings, and they've been so successful, teams are copying this, and they went to the World Series 2 years ago. They lost, but you with Neander, they are always one step ahead of the competition, and they have to be, because they can't spend their way to success. They develop players very well. They know which players they're looking for. They do a great job with their scouting staff, and there's a synergy between the GM and the manager on the field. In fact, the manager almost is told what to do by the GM. That he doesn't go by feeling or instinct. They go by the numbers. Now there's got to be a balance, but
right.
You really feel the Rails know what they're doing. They're one step ahead of every other team in Major League Baseball, and that's the kind of organization I want the Minnesota Vikings to be. I want our GM to be the person who provides with an edge over every opponent we play. Whereas if the past couple of years, we always felt we were outgunned on coaching and general manager, and
depending on who we played. And then every time
Yeah,
we played down or up to the level of the opponent, and we're like, why is that? We shouldn't. Mm-hmm.
we need a Eric Neander clone for the Minnesota Vikings as a GM. And that doesn't mean like going total analytics geek. It just means somebody who's forward thinking, is cutting edge, like you said, Dave, and is taking the Vikings in a direction organizationally where we are going to be cutting edge, leading edge as far as how professional football in the NFL is going to be played from 2022 onward.
Mm-hmm. Now, going back to Catherine, one of the interesting things that somebody had asked a question of why she thinks she's good, and it came up to the communication part. Players aren't afraid to talk to her, which I don't think was the case in our situation here in Minnesota this last season. And she's easier. She's not a threat. I mean, she's probably 5'4", 5'5", whatever. So she's not a physical threat of any means. And it should be interesting to see if that sort of dealing, on top of the analytics and all the other stuff, but that sort of dealing with the organization and leading the organization that way fosters the communication that the Wilfs have talked about, the collaboration, the making everybody feel good, that they're there and that they're contributing. I wonder if that might push it over the top. We shall see. When do you expect? You want like this guy, Meander. When do you expect the Wilfs to come up with a decision on the GM?
What I expect they'll make a decision by next week. I was told that what I read today was that they won't rush it, but
Mm-hmm.
it seems to me taking a week to only 7 days to interview 8 candidates and make a decision is rushing it. But really, things move fast in pro football. You've got a divisional rival who also needs a GM and a head coach, and they're looking for one. And you don't want to lose your preferred candidate to the Chicago Bears because you were too slow getting on it. So,
I'm about
um,
to say,
but,
GMAC, she's on other teams' lists that I've
yeah,
seen for
we're
interviews.
not the only ones interviewing these 8 folks. So, so you've got to get on it. You've got to interview them as quickly as you can and make a decision as quickly as you can. And they already know these people and they've interviewed them.
They've already
They've
vetted.
researched them.
Mm-hmm.
They've vetted and researched. So really, I think it's coming down to the interviews, what answers those candidates provide the search committee, and how much they like it and how many points they give them for and how many boxes they tick off. That's going to be the deciding factor, but they have to make a quick decision, and they have to make it by next week uh, because you don't want, I think you don't want you hire a GM, and then you got to hire a head coach, and you don't want to be hiring a head coach that the GM is not keen on, because then you get kind of a situation like you got with in Houston, where maybe you hire a David Culley type, and they're gone after 1 year, unless the David Culley type takes you to the Super Bowl. But there's a time factor here. You've got several teams that need head coaches in particular,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't want to lose out on your preferred candidate because you were still messing around with selecting who your GM was. And I
And
think
and
that's
Mark said
why
he
we're seeing.
wants the GM to have some input into the head coach. And at minimum, you want
Yeah.
it to be, yeah, I can work with him. At minimum, that's what you want.
Yes. Yes.
Not
And
with,
and I think
no, we're not going to get along. Why'd you hire him, Mark? And why'd you hire me? No, that's setting up for failure straight from the get go.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, no, and I think that the Vikings are still. We've seen some head coaching candidates who are definitely getting interviewed by the Vikings even before they have a general manager selected. But again, we're in a bit of a time crunch here because we're not. We're one of 6 teams or so who need a head coach, and we've got to start interviewing some of them, even if we don't have the general
right.
manager picked, because you've got to get some data on these guys and to
And
get to a quick decision.
right. And then we have the playoffs and when people can be released from the playoffs. Um, how they can they do a Zoom interview in between? And these right now are Zoom interviews. Yeah, I think if you make it to the next level, it'll be come to Minnesota type interview. We know on the coaches, and I believe it's the same for the front office, but if they're still in the playoffs, they cannot do that. You got to wait till they're finished. It's interesting. But with the coaches, and if you were paying attention this morning, there was a whole lot of traffic on throughout the Viking sphere of this coach being asked for permission to interview, and it's the point where the Vikings have made up their short list, and then they submit those people names to the league. The leagues come out. Schefter reports on, well, the Vikings want to interview so and so, and we're seeing that list. It's 6 or 8 or 9 people long, and it can grow there too. But we're going to have to wait. But I think when they get to the GM portion, they may say, hey, we've already interviewed Coach A, B, C, and D. We like these guys. Which one of these do you think? Have you worked with them before or whatever? And they've already got that preliminary interview stuff done. Can they work, within the organization? Are they going to fit? Blah, blah, blah. And then it's just matching up their GM candidate with, can you do with this? And they'll already have that ready for the GM once he or she is in place and on board. We shall see. Hello, Noir.
Thank you, Noir. Are we going to help that person who's from Pakistan, Dave, and wants to
I don't
get to the U.S.?
I can fully understand why they want to get to the U.S. from Pakistan. Wholeheartedly, being just across the border from there myself and dealing with the Pakistanis numerous times when we move stuff through there, I can understand why he wants to get out, especially in the summertime. It's a hot, miserable mess, but it is a pretty country. I'll give him that much for it. All right. Now we'll go down to the last theme of the day. We're looking at some of the holes, and the one hole you wanted to talk about was that linebacker. Do we have a problem with linebacker?
We certainly do, Dave. And this is going to be like a regular segment of this show during the off season, is look at each position on the Vikings and look at the strengths and weaknesses of that position. And just starting with linebacker today for no particular reason other than it could potentially be a hot mess. And if this season, the Vikings defense overall was poor. Some strong performances by certain individuals, but as a unit collectively, it did not perform as expected, not even close, and actually was probably a bit worse than last year. But linebacker, we're not sure yet what defense the Vikings are going to run. They have run a 4-3 since probably, Dave, 1984, 85?
Yeah, somewhere there. Now, Zimmer's is more of a hybrid, but it's a base 4-3, yes.
Yeah, it's a base 4-3, so whether the Vikings are going to run a 3-4 or a 4-3, we do not know at this point in time. But let's just assume we're just going to deal with the linebackers that we do have, and right now the only sure thing really is, in my mind, is Eric Kendricks, and he's signed for another 2 years. Got I think for a player of his caliber, a fairly reasonable cap hit of $13.5 million. I think for somebody who's as good as Eric Kendricks, that's pretty good. So he's here for 2 years. He's going to be an inside linebacker, middle linebacker.
Pro Eric Kendricks.
Right. Even if it's not first team, he's still there. But
great
player. I don't think it was first team this year.
Let's see. There's 2 Vikings that made first team. Kene Nwangu for kick return, and then the other one was Eric Kendricks, linebacker. The reporters,
I didn't see
AP
that.
All-Pro.
Okay. Anyway,
I believe it was Kendricks. It wasn't Harrison.
No. Anyway, I'll have to look that up.
We'll have to look it up. Maybe somebody in
But
the comments can chime in.
yeah. But Kendrick's a very good player. He'll definitely be back next year, I think, unless something really weird happens with whether we're running a 3-4 or a 4-3. But Anthony
I think
Barr,
he's
Stephen Power
depleted.
was just saying that Barr sucks. Well, Barr doesn't
Hmm.
suck, but for the amount of cash he makes, I was talking about last week, you'd like him to be more of an impactful player than he was. Did have a very good, I think, last 3 games of the season. The problem
Hmm.
was the other 14, some of which he didn't play because he missed a couple.
Well, especially at the
Uh,
beginning, because those knees being degenerate. And we know what degenerate knees lead to, i.e., look up Sam Bradford. It's
yeah,
it's not going to be. It will be if you'll be fighting a losing battle the whole time, and you might get a few games, and then it might flare up, and then he's out for four. And with no guarantee to come back. It's
no, none.
it's that
And at
type of situation.
and at soon to be 30, it's not going to get any better
Correct.
um, going forward. So,
And it doesn't matter
and
how
the
much
only
money you throw at him, it's not going to help the knee.
no, it is not. Um, so last week I talked and I said he won't be back. It's pretty much guaranteed. The only thing about Barr is that whether and his contract's voided after this year too, right? Like so,
But he's going to have
he's
dead
an
cap that carries over.
yeah, 9.9 million of it. So uh, the Vikings, I don't think he'll be back. I don't
Okay, it
think
was
he'd be worth
Harrison.
the money.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. You're making good use of your time in COVID self isolation, buddy. Uh, but it, so and you're not having Barr there. Nick Vigil, the other starting guy for in the Vikings of the 3 starting linebackers, it was on a 1-year deal with the Vikings, a very cheap 1-year deal. But the thing with Vigil is his first 2 games, he had a pick six and he had got a sack at Joe Burrow,
Hmm.
and after that, not is very noticeable. His run defense was probably the weakest of the 3
Hmm.
Vikings starting linebackers. I think a new head coach and a new general manager probably won't value him very much, and will want to look at other options at
And it
linebacker. So
depends
I
on the
don't see him
defense they
back.
want to play, whether they want to go back to a bigger linebacker or not versus a small one, because we tend to run with smaller ones.
We
It's going
do,
to be
yes.
interesting.
But and we don't know what the market will be for Nick Vigil either as he hits
Hmm.
free agency. So um, I don't think he'll be back. I don't think Barr will be back. And then outside of those starting 3, uh, you got Chaz Surratt. We don't know what we have here because he barely
Because he
got
was a third
dressed.
rounder.
Yeah, he's a third rounder who Zimmer never dressed. You got Troy Dye, a second year with the team. Um, I don't know. I've always considered him he's a backup middle linebacker, but he's really, really undersized for that position, I think, and misses a lot of tackles. Blake Lynch, he had he was kind of, I think, the most pleasant surprise of the younger Vikings linebackers this year. He had a great game against Detroit, and he might be somebody you work with, but I kind of feel like he's probably more of a special teamer, backup, occasional starter when the starter gets hurt kind of guy. If he's even he is signed next year, so if the Vikings want him back, he will be back. And then you got Ryan Connolly, who's on IR and is just a special team guy, and then Tuff Borland, who is an undrafted rookie free agent that they brought up from the practice squad. But there's a long way of saying that there's not a whole lot of depth at the Vikings linebacker position right now, and they really need to look
And,
at early in the draft at drafting an impact linebacker. Is it Nakobe Dean from Georgia, who at 6 foot and 230 pounds is not the biggest guy? Is it Devin
yeah,
Lloyd
that would have
from
been
Utah,
monstrous.
another rangy,
Hmm.
long, came to Utah as a safety, became a linebacker, but a guy who made tons of plays. Didn't have the greatest Rose Bowl game though against Ohio State, but he's been a very good player. Is it Smith from Penn State? We know last year there was a linebacker came out of Penn State, drafted in the first round, and he did pretty well. by the name of Micah Parsons. I think Smith is
well.
looked to. Yeah, I think Smith is looked at as more of a second-round guy, but he's one of the top 3 linebackers I've seen. So the Vikings really need to look at drafting an impact linebacker early this year, I believe. Not a whole lot on free agency. There's a lot of work to do at linebacker for the Vikings this offseason, and the options, at least with the team or in free agency, are not, I would say, optimal. So
and we'll get into
a lot of work to do there.
When CTP gets into the draft more with Tyler Fornes and everybody that does our draft side of the house, we'll get more into seeing how that linebacker class is, and we'll keep you updated on that, as well as the other positions that we know are going to be good and how they may fit in. But the key question is, we need to know how they may fit in, and that takes a new GM and a new coach and what sort of philosophies they're going to employ. We know we have one good linebacker. Dave. We're going to need to build up some more, no matter what sort of scheme we play next year.
Yeah, it's just like you said, you need that GM, you need that head coach. We do not have any idea other than like a few of the Justin Jeffersons, the Eric Kendricks, the Harrison Smith, those guys, the Brian O'Neills, those guys are going to be valued by any head coach or general manager who comes to the team. But for a vast majority of the staff, we don't know what they'll think of the talent that the Vikings have and what role they want them to have, or whether they want they think these guys are starters or backups, or we just don't know any of those things right now. And there could be a lot more movement with the Vikings roster than we actually think, just based on what the head coach feels about the roster and what the general manager how they feel about the roster.
Right.
We know that when
plays into it, how attitude and leadership within the locker room play into it. There's a whole lot of stuff going to happen, and it should be exciting.
Very exciting. And yeah, even when Zimmer first came to the Vikings, of course, it wasn't a whole slew of Bengals that came over with him, but there were some Bengals that eventually filtered over to the Vikings, Terrence Newman being one. Some others like George Iloka and Emmanuel Lemire were really fringe guys, but the head coach, if they've been with an NFL team before, or the general manager has been with an NFL team before, they will have some guys with the organizations that they were previously employed with that they'll want to bring with them to the Vikings.
Mm-hmm. So, it should be interesting. That's it, folks, for today's show. Is there anything you want to say, Darren, to the good people?
Oh, I'd want to thank the good people for showing up today. I'm seeing like well over 30 on my screen that are
live watching. At any
for live watching, and they're clearly not too interested in watching the Bengals Oakland Raiders playoff game right now. I know it's Las Vegas, folks, but I refuse to call the Raiders the Las Vegas Raiders.
And that's a possible head coach opening too. We don't know what the Raiders are going to do with their interim head coach, whether they're going to make him the permanent or if they're going to go out looking for head coaches as well. So we'll find out. They got to get through the playoffs first.
That's right. We got a head start on them anyway.
Mm-hmm. And then tonight is the New England Buffalo game. And that looks to be a nice weather game. And I love when weather comes into play, a factor in football. And so it might be not so easy for New England, but we'll find out.
Or Buffalo.
Or Buffalo. Well, Buffalo lost last time. Up there in the weather. So
they did, and they depend more on the pass than the Patriots do. So that will be interesting.
Well, everybody, enjoy your super duper fantastic, wonderful wild card weekend, and we'll be here with you watching the football as soon as we get done here. But I want to thank you all for coming, all for joining us in the chat, and as always, Skol Vikings!
Skol Vikings, baby.
Wrong one. thank you for watching or listening. As always, if you like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. And if you're listening to the podcast, please rate us on your favorite aggregator. Skol, everybody.